In the year 2000, after 21 years as president of the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers, Tom Mooney, a take-no-prisoners defender of public education professionalism, became the president of Ohio Federation of Teachers. Under Mooney, in 2001, Ohio Federation of Teachers launched a lawsuit charging that the state had illegally lavished public funds with no strings attached on schools that are run by for-profit management companies, without requiring these new-made school operators to provide either financial or academic accountability. Probably Ohio's single most out-front opponent of charter schools, Mooney charges the private education industry with deceptive marketing of fly-by-night private schools whose students, quote, consistently perform worse than the urban public school districts in which most are located. In 2003, 36 of 41 charter schools earned the state's lowest rating, academic emergency. 18 public schools of the city of Hamilton earned an impressive rating of continuous improvement. Why, he says, do charter schools want to provide parents and children with a choice that is worse than what they have? Why they do so, he says, is for profit. And the profits from the education industry can be pretty spectacular. The idea of choice in education was a good one, but, says Mooney, it's been hijacked by a coalition of profiteers and ideologues in the legislature who believe in privatizing for the sake of privatizing. As for No Child Left Behind, Mooney sees it as little more than a plot to put public education out of business altogether and replace locally run public schools with business-run mixed schools.
Ohio, unfortunately, is at one end of the spectrum, which is a pretty wide spectrum among the states as far as the quality of their charter school programs. This has got to be one of the worst. It has very little safeguards for either the taxpayer or the students. The state has basically allowed pretty much any entrepreneur who wants to put up a tent to, collect taxpayer dollars without having to produce any real educational benefit. It's hard to overstate how bad it is, in fact. I want to say they'll give a charter to any P.T. Barnum with a tent, but that would be an understatement because they don't really need to even bring their own tent. Partly because the feds, Rod Page and George Bush, are willing to lavish federal grants, startup grants on pretty much any charter school, regardless of its quality. We still believe charter schools was a good idea. The notion still has potential. In Ohio, it's been hijacked by a combination of profiteers and ideologues who want to push privatization for the sake of privatization. It doesn't matter whether the results are good or bad or indifferent, because private is inherently better than public services in their minds. Well, then there are political ideologues, a guy like Representative John Husted, for example. And although he's closely tied to the business community in Dayton, and he's making sure that lots of our tax dollars get funneled to profit-making ventures like White Hat Management, I believe all the indications are that his motivations are ideological and political. He is hell-bent on privatizing public education. And that's really kind of one front in a larger war. I mean, it's not just education that those folks want to privatize. It's pretty much all public services. I used to throw out a little line in speeches that, the right wing wants to privatize everything except maybe your local police department and the U.S. Army. Boy, was I naive. Boy, did I underestimate these guys, because they've been now aggressively privatizing our most basic national security functions, like the military. I mean, what we're seeing in Iraq, that's kind of a sub-story that I think deserves a lot more attention. When we're fighting this battle about privatizing education, it's just one front in a much bigger war to dismantle, any kind of public services, any kind of foundation for a democracy that there are certain services that all citizens are entitled to and can count on. That's really the war that we're in. The number one institution that we have the greatest problem with in terms of its negative effects on this battle in Ohio is called the United States Department of Education. Because they got the big bucks. Yes, there are other foundations and rich folks with a right-wing bent that are giving money to promote privatization of schools, but nothing compared to what Rod Page and his Department of Education have been giving out in federal startup grants. Basically, every charter school that opens in Ohio is getting $500,000 in startup grants, the large majority of it from the federal government and a smaller portion from the state Department of Ed. In addition, Page gave one of those famous secretary's discretionary grants to a private group in Dayton that was devoted to promoting the expansion of charter schools in Dayton. You also, of course, have the Fordham Foundation that does more sort of the ideological front work and press work and propaganda work for the charter schools rather than operating grants, but they play an important role. You have the Buckeye Institute that also cranks out, that started in Dayton, I believe it's now based in Columbus, cranks out lots of pseudo studies and reports that promote the values, supposed value of privatization. But the government, under the current administration anyway, the federal government is the big player.